Good.
Yeah.
All right, it is 6:04. Caucus is in session. Agenda, anyone with anything to add this evening? Seeing nothing. Fiscal officers report, just the bills tonight?
The bills and the bid reading.
All righty. Council minutes, has everyone had a chance to review the minutes that were either emailed or in your packet? All righty. Tonight's legislation, we do have quite a lengthy list. Everyone familiar with tonight's legislation? Have any questions? All righty, it's 6:04 and Caucus is closed.
I think we can get started immediately since everyone's at their house. I'd like to call to order McDonald Village Council meeting for Wednesday, April 22nd, 2020. Roll.
Mr. Harvey,
Here.
Mr. Lewis,
Here,
Mr. Fisher,
Present.
Mr. DeZee,
Here.
Mr. Schmidt,
Present.
Mr. Joyne.
Present.
Since Mr. Dimitrovich has a flag behind him, we will now stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
To the flag.
to the flag
United States
United States of America
and to the republic
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
under
under
God,
God,
visible
indivisible,
for all.
with liberty and justice for all.
Marty's screen is frozen.
Tell them to come over here.
all right,
Here.
we can have a moment of silence for troops serving abroad and anyone who has been infected with the COVID-19. And the
We will
Lord's
now
Prayer.
have a moment of silence. Those dealing with the coronavirus, including first responders.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven.
In heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from all evil. For thine is the kingdom, power, and glory forever. Amen.
Amen. All righty, I'll jump in for Mayor Puckett. Approval of council minutes from council meeting March 4th, 2020. Moved by Councilman Fisher to approve. Discussion. Roll.
Mr. Fisher,
Aye.
Mr.
Can
Harvey,
you guys hear me?
I
Mr.
abstain.
Lewis,
Wait a minute, I
Aye.
abstain. I abstain.
Okay.
Okay, I abstain.
Mr. DeZee,
Aye.
Mr. Schmidt.
Aye.
Mr. Joins.
Aye.
Mayor, if I can interject, we are having extreme difficulty with your connection. It's moving extremely slow. I believe he's dialing in now.
Yeah, he's calling the number now.
Perfect. We'll just pause. We'll hang tight.
Just make sure you mute out your computer, Marty. I see it is, so you might get some feedback off of that. Amy, can you unmute him?
Yeah.
Should be live now, Marty.
Okay. So,
We're on
what-
adoption of agenda.
okay. So moving on, the adoption of tonight's agenda.
Yeah, move to amend the agenda under legislation to make legislation F and legislation G a reading on the first, second, and third readings instead of those both being the first reading.
Moved by Councilman Fisher to amend the agenda to alter legislation F and G to go through the first, second, and third reading of these legislations. Discussion. Roll.
Mr. Fisher,
Aye.
Mr. Harvey.
Aye.
Mr. Lewis,
Aye.
Mr. DeZee,
Aye.
Mr. Schmidt,
Aye.
Mr. Joins. You're muted. Yes,
How that happened. Sorry about that, Lori.
that's okay.
Aye.
Joins.
I don't know how that happened.
Legislation passed. Moving on to the mayor's report. I have a couple things today. But first, the monthly mayor's court report. Computer fund one, $105. Court costs, $245. Additional costs, $29. City revenue from fines, $610. Miles municipal court fines, $1,143. Parking tickets, $70, with a total to the city, $2,202. One of the other things I'd like to mention was the Fireman's Festival for the 4th of July. I have been in discussion with Joe Danko, the head of the social organization, of the possibility of moving that back to October so we can get it in. Nothing definite now. We'll let everyone know as soon as possible. Obviously, we would like to have the festival on the 4th. That may not be possible, but we'll work to get a festival in one way or another. As far as the Memorial Day celebration, as of right now, it is on. That could change daily, and we'll address that as it comes. So the only other thing I have is I'd like to thank everybody in the village. I know the things that are going on right now are an inconvenience. Hopefully we get through this soon and we can open our parks and enjoy things like we always have. And as soon as we can do so safely, we will for sure. So, but I would like to thank Chief Stitt and Chief Woodley working through this crisis, and I know they're doing the best that they can, and I think they're doing a great job. So thank you both. And that's all I have today. So moving on to report of village officials, our village administrator, Mr. Dimitrovich.
Thank you, Mayor. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. I would like to report that we did have a bid opening today for our 2020 roadway project. We were opening today with GPD. Myself and Amy were here, and we did open. I know that the fiscal officer will read those into the records, but we are looking to move forward with the road paving project this year. So as long as the state does provide funds, which we have been notified that they may extend some of the payment opportunities there. So some projects might get put back a little bit, but we are still looking to move forward with the project. On another matter, I'd like to thank our solicitor, Doug Ross, for defending the village repeatedly. And I know that he does it in a quick and timely manner to the benefit of the village and at the least cost to our residents. So I want to thank Doug Ross for continuing to defend us and keep us out of harm's way. Thank you. I'm done.
Yeah, thank you. Comments or questions for Mr. Dimitrovich? Moving on to our police chief, Chief Woodley.
Thank you, Mayor. The police department's March activity report has been dispersed to the mayor, council member. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them at this time. If not, I have nothing further.
Thank you. Comments or questions for our police chief? Moving on to our fire chief, Chief Stitt.
Thank you, Mayor. My report's been submitted. Any questions? I'll entertain them now. If not, move on.
Thank you. Comments or questions for Chief Stitt? Moving on to our solicitor, Mr. Ross.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The only thing I have to report is, if you recall, the Joe Dugan versus Village of McDonald Public Records lawsuit. It was dismissed by Judge Logan, Common Police Court last year. Mr. Dugan and his lawyer appealed that to the 11th District Court of Appeals. The case was orally argued by Mr. Dugan's lawyer to the Court of Appeals, as well as myself. And on April 13th, the Court of Appeals issued a 13-page opinion, basically saying the same thing that the trial court said, that Mr. Dugan had absolutely no facts or evidence whatsoever to support any of his claims. Of note, the Court of Appeals reviews things de novo, meaning they don't give the trial court any deference. They review the entire record afresh and make their own decisions. And all three judges concluded, again, the same thing that the trial court concluded, that is, Mr. Dugan had zero evidence at all. Since I know things get distorted in social media and commentary, we did post on the village's website under the announcement page the full 13-page opinion. If anybody wants to read it and see exactly what the Court of Appeals said about Mr. Dugan's case that was thrown out of court, they're welcome to do so. That's all I have.
Thank you. And I really do appreciate you, defending the village, and you do a great job of it. Moving on to committee reports, President Pro Tem, Mr. Lewis.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. We met this evening via Zoom meeting for caucus at 6:04. We discussed the agenda, fiscal officer's report, council minutes, and tonight's legislation. And we closed within 1 minute at 6:04. That's all I have.
Thank you. Comments or questions for Mr. Lewis? Moving on to our parks and buildings representative, Mr. Harvey.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. We met last night at 6:18 on our Zoom, And the items we discussed were basically what we know now. And that was the big school decisions about the school are, there will not be returning to class. So with that being said, we know that all the events that the school had scheduled down in our park facilities and areas have all been canceled. That's one thing we know for a fact. No picnics in the, class picnics, the track, everything that they had scheduled down through here, positive impact day, those have been canceled. As the mayor and everybody has suggested, a lot of things are coming up down the road that are pending at probably the next 2 or 3 weeks. You're watching the governor, you'll see what he's thinking about, what he's talking about, the fairs and whatnot and everything, how far they're down on the list, what's opening up first. So we're listening too. And when those decisions start coming down, keep an eye on our pages and stuff, because we will be making announcements when we know that, the facilities that we have scheduled are not going to be able to be done. And already you've heard from the mayor that things are just what they are. We have to deal with them as they come down here. And we started a meeting at 6:18, and that was pretty much everything else is in limbo right now. And as they come factual, we will, post it somewhere. You'll be notified. And as we already said, if there's something an emergency needs to be done for us to meet, we can do that. But it seems like right now we're going to be meeting on the, where do we got, the 19th set up? Right, is that right?
Yeah, the 19th and 20th.
19th and 20th. So our committee meetings are going to be on the 19th. It sounds like we'll be in the same kind of format for now. And that could change also, but for right now, we'll be meeting on the 19th. Does anyone else in the committee have anything to say, or anybody else have anything for parks? Mayor, thank you. That's it.
Thank you. Comments or questions for Mr. Harvey? Moving on to our safety chair, Mr. Fisher.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Safety did have a meeting yesterday. I forgot to write down the times. I believe it was from 6:14 to 6:18. As far as the police department is concerned, as you heard from Chief Woodley earlier, he did submit the month-end report. I did discuss a little bit that Dinosaur Plastics and Bob Hendricks, specifically the point man there, donated full face shields to the police and fire department. So we want to publicly thank him for doing that. I know he's done that for several area departments as well. Chief Woodley's informed me, very kind of them to do so. We appreciate that. We are going to have a delay in the delivery of our police cruiser due to everything that's going on right now. So we have no projected date when that's going to come in. I did fail to mention that Chief Woodley and I had a meeting with Hudson Radio over the Marks radio system, and we were going to have scheduled a meeting to do some testing in the village for the system. Now with everything going on, we're going to delay that, so we will let you know what's going on in the future here. I'm sure as soon as things go to normal, we'll have those testing done, knowing full well that we're going to go to the Marks system. The fire department, Chief Stitt did submit his month-end report. We did retrofit an ambulance for COVID patients to make it easy for a quick scrub down. They have plastic lining everywhere. They have a solution to use to completely clean down, and also too, it gives us the ability to help out in mutual aid situations. Like a proactive approach there, Chief Stitt. We did receive a delayed grant for a heart monitor, which was an item that we were in desperate need of. We had borrowed a unit, so it's nice that we can add that back to our supply. Ohio CAT did perform an inspection on one of our fire engines. It was a complete inspection. So now that we have that detailed list, as things start to open back up, the mayor, Chief Stitt, Lori, and I will sit down and start to discuss how we're going to approach that, because obviously it's all expenditures. And on a sad note, long tenured medic and firefighter John Beard passed away from our department. I want to extend condolences to his family and thank him for his service to the village of McDonald. It's always appreciated when someone gives a sacrifice in their time to the village, and we appreciate it. That is all I had. If anybody has any questions, I'd be more than happy to entertain them.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions for Mr. Fisher? Moving on to our Finance and Capital Improvements Chair, Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, Mayor. We met last evening via Zoom for finance at 6:05. We closed at 6:11. We did discuss tonight's legislation, one of which is the emergency read of the tax ordinance. That is basically a transfer ordinance that is taking our income tax transfers into their designated accounts. We also have the first read of the 1.5 mil renewal levy. That levy has been in existence for around 30 years. It is at minimal cost to homeowners, and it is a first read to get that on the ballot in November. In addition, we have the first read of a resolution to take proper use of mandatory drug fines. That is setting up the policy on how it can be spent. And then we do have two transfer ordinances, one of which is the DUI task force being closed out at the recommendation of the state auditor. That has about $10,000. And then we also are closing out the universal hiring fund. And that is about $3,500, both of which will go into the general fund. Both of those this evening, as we discussed last evening, will be passed on a first read only, suspending the rules of council just in light of time because of the COVID-19 crisis. The only additional thing I did have was not finance related. However, I do want to thank you, Mr. Harvey, for bringing to my attention that I neglected to bring up committee and council meetings, which we did discuss last evening. We will set one meeting for the month of May. Committees will be held Tuesday, May 19th via Zoom at 6 p.m. And the May council meeting will be held Wednesday, May the 20th via Zoom at 6 p.m. That is all I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Comments or questions for Mr. Lewis? Moving on to our Service Chair, Mr. Schmidt.
Thank you, Mayor. It's good to see you all, even though it's via Zoom. Service opened at 6:11 via Zoom. We did have reviewed the two pieces of legislation this evening. Legislation A is the third reading to approve NOPEC service agreement with NextEra to provide electrical aggregation to the residents and businesses of the village. We also discussed legislation D, which is an emergency reading of an ordinance enacting COVID-19 additional employment leave policy. We did have the policy sent out to everyone from council. Hopefully you all were available to review that. I'm just going to touch on a few things about that policy. With the COVID-19 crisis, this allows us to comply with the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. This will be a temporary policy effective April 1, 2020, and will expire and terminate on December 31st. But this may be amended at any time. The eligibility of this is for our full and part-time employees. There are reasons for this emergency paid sick leave in this policy. The reasons 1 through 3 allow our employee to be paid at a full rate for 10 days, up to a capped rate of $511 a day. 4 through 6, if they qualify for that, it is a 2/3 of their full rate for the 10 days, and that will be capped at $200 a day. Last, it does also acknowledge the emergency family and medical leave expansion. I won't go into detail with that. It is in the policy, but it's great that we move forward with this as soon as we can as the emergency read for if and when any of our employees do come down positive with the COVID-19 or need to be of assistance to a family member. That would be infected with COVID-19. We also discussed, which Thomas, Mr. Richards, he did already discuss, that the bids did open today for the Massachusetts and Connecticut paving project. Mr. Dimitrovich and Mr. Ross, they did go through and add an addendum to the contract to be able to extend the signing date with the contractors to a later date outside of the printed date. Like Mr. Dimitrovich said, not knowing when the state will have the, the funding for this grant, this allows us, to extend the start date and that of the project to a later date with this addendum. Excuse me. Last, we did discuss the removal of the blue containers for the cardboard collection. With this removal, we do need to extend the full term, which is up August 31st of 2020. Once that full term is over, then we'll be able to terminate the contract. So this will save the village around $1,400 this year, and then moving forward, it's about anywhere between $6,000 and $8,000 off the budget. So Mr. Dmitrovich is working with the green team to get some supplemental containers there for the cardboard. These will be free. Okay, so with that being said, I urge our residents and anybody who takes cardboard down there and other materials, please be respectful of this. This is a great thing that we have, that we can take our products down there. I did drive by a few times and saw that it was a complete mess and people weren't flattening the cardboard as we're asking them to do so. This takes time for our employees to go down there, clean it up, and have to smash it all down, which we all can do our part in taking a few minutes to flatten the cardboard to get it in there so it doesn't look like a train wreck down there. So, and then that will also allow our employees to not have to deal with that. So please be respectful with that. And thank you for your work with the green team, Thomas. With that being said, we closed at 6:14 p.m. and if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to entertain.
One thing, Councilman, it's the Gotta Go Green out of Trumbull County, Geauga, Trumbull County. That's who we're working with to get free containers.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Mr. Schmidt, if I may,
Yes.
on the Families First Coronavirus Response Act and additional leave, that is something the village is required to do by federal legislation. And since this is our first meeting after that act came down, it's necessary to pass it as an emergency and get this in place as soon as we can for the employees.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Comments or questions for Mr. Schmidt? Moving on to our Planning Commission representative, Mr. Fisher.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. At present, there are no pressing items. So right now, we don't have a meeting scheduled for the foreseeable future. I know a lot of the issues that Planning Commission would normally take up probably won't be considered during this COVID response. So we will let you know in the future if and when we do have issues arise and when we will set a meeting for that. If anybody has any questions, I'd be more than happy to entertain them.
Thank you. Comments or questions for Mr. Fisher? Moving on to our community chest representative, Mr. Dizzy.
Thank you, Mayor, but at this time I have no report.
Okay. Remarks from person or groups present. We do have a letter that was submitted to be read on the record. It is from Joseph Dugan. It states, as far as the decision of the 11th District Court to affirm the local court decision in my case against the village for violation of state law and local ordinance is without reason. It is unbelievable a local trial judge could even attempt to make a finding on a summary motion without foundation of law, citation of other legal precedent, case law, or otherwise. it is without question, the village went 10 years and 11 months in violation of state law ORC 101.15B and 121.22C for the creation and maintaining of public meeting minutes and ignored its own ordinance 3142-13 to conduct studies for council decisions. The village could never prove they had those minutes in question, nor could they prove any followed the law and provided them to me upon request. As for the water rate study, supporting that then mayor's declaration that the water rates increase was due to water loss, how could council approve such an increase with absolutely no shred of evidence to back up then mayor's public statements? These few facts alone will make an appeal of the Ohio Supreme Court a possible option. Someone need to put checks and balances in local government. I guess the only comment I would have to that letter would be that that's absurd, and not one but 4 judges found that Dugan's claims were completely unsubstantiated and false. So, moving on. Seeing no old business, seeing no new business, moving on to legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have a third reading of a resolution for the purpose of approving NOPEC's extension of its service agreement with NextEra Energy Solutions LLC to provide electrical aggregation services for the village of McDonald, Ohio through NOPEC beginning January of 2020.
Move to accept as the third read.
Moved by Councilman Schmidt to pass this as a third read. Discussion? Roll.
Lori, you're muted.
Sorry. Mr. Schmidt,
Aye.
Mr. Harvey,
Aye.
Mr. Lewis,
Aye.
Mr. Fisher,
Aye.
Mr. DeZee,
Aye.
Mr. Joynes.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion passed. Moving on to legislation B.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have a reading of an ordinance transferring funds within various funds within the village of McDonald, Ohio for a period beginning January 1, 2020 and ending December 31, 2020 and declaring an emergency.
Move to suspend the rules of council.
Moved by Councilman Lewis to suspend the rules of council. Discussion? Roll.
Mr. Lewis,
Aye.
Mr. Harvey,
Aye.
Mr. Fisher,
Aye.
Mr. DeZee,
Aye.
Mr. Schmidt,
Aye.
Mr. Joynes.
Aye.
Move to pass an emergency.
Moved by Councilman Lewis to pass this as an emergency. Discussion? Roll.
Mr. Lewis,
Aye.
Mr. Harvey,
Aye.
Mr. Fisher,
Aye.
Mr. DeZee,
Aye.
Mr. Schmidt,
Aye.
Mr. Joynes.
Aye.
Moving on to legislation C.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have a first reading of a resolution to proceed and submit to the electors of the village of McDonald, Ohio, the question of the renewal of a current operating levy of 1 5/10 mils for a period of 5 years for the purpose of providing a renewal of funds for the current operating expenses of the village.
Move to pass the first read.
Moved by Councilman Lewis to pass this as a first read. Discussion? Roll.
Mr. Lewis,
Aye.
Mr. Harvey,
Aye.
Mr. Fisher,
Aye.
Mr. DeZee,
Aye.
Mr. Schmidt,
Aye.
Mr. Joines.
Aye.
Motion passed. Moving on to legislation D.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have an ordinance for the purpose of enacting a COVID-19 additional employment leave policy in accordance with the Families First Coronavirus Response Act enacted by Congress and declaring an emergency.
Move to suspend the rules of council.
Moved by Councilman Schmidt to suspend the rules of council. Roll.
Mr. Schmidt,
Aye.
Mr. Harvey,
Aye.
Mr. Lewis,
Aye.
Mr. Fisher, Mr. DeZee,
Aye.
Mr. Joines.
Aye.
Move to pass as an emergency.
By Councilman Schmidt to pass this as an emergency. Discussion. Roll.
Mr. Schmidt,
Aye.
Mr. Harvey,
Aye.
Mr. Lewis,
Aye.
Mr. Fisher,
Aye.
Mr. DeZee,
Aye.
Mr. Joines.
Aye.
Thank you. Moving on to legislation E.
Thank you. We have a first reading of a resolution adopting a written internal control policy for the Village of McDonald Police Department's use and disposition of money paid to the village for mandatory drug fines.
Move to pass the first read.
Moved by Councilman Lewis to pass this as a first read. Discussion. Roll.
Mr. Lewis,
Aye.
Mr. Harvey,
Aye.
Mr. Fisher,
Aye.
Mr. DeZee,
Aye.
Mr. Schmidt,
Aye.
Mr. Joines.
Aye.
Thank you. Moving on to legislation F.
Thank you. We have a reading of a resolution transferring funds within various funds within the Village of McDonald, Ohio for a period beginning January 1, 2020 and ending December 31, 2020.
Move to suspend the rules of council and waive the three-read process.
Moved by Councilman Lewis to suspend the rules of council and waive the three-read process. Discussion. Roll.
Mr. Lewis,
Aye.
Mr. Harvey,
Aye.
Mr. Fisher,
Aye.
Mr. DeZee,
Aye.
Mr. Schmidt,
Aye.
Mr. Joines.
Aye.
Move to pass for the first read.
Moved by Councilman Lewis to pass this on a first read. Discussion. Roll.
Mr. Lewis,
Aye.
Mr. Harvey,
Aye.
Mr. Fisher,
Aye.
Mr. DeZee,
Aye.
Mr. Schmidt,
Aye.
Mr. Joines.
Aye.
Thank you. Moving on to legislation G.
Thank you. Our final piece of legislation is another resolution transferring funds within various funds within the Village of McDonald, Ohio for a period beginning January 1, 2020 and ending December 31, 2020.
Move to suspend the rules of council and waive the three-read process.
Moved by Councilman Lewis to suspend the rules of council and waive the three-read process. Discussion.
Yes, Mayor, as with the previous legislation, both of these are being done, as I mentioned in my report, just in order to remain timely in light of the COVID-19 crisis because of our meeting timeframes, in order to allow our fiscal officer to transfer these funds as quickly as possible.
Just real quick to add to that, I think Amy, when it comes to detail of the minutes, it's probably most correct to say it's passing, not just on the first, but passing on the first, second, and third reading.
Thank you. Roll.
Mr. Lewis,
Aye.
Mr. Harvey,
Aye.
Mr. Fisher,
Aye.
Mr. DeZee,
Aye.
Mr. Schmidt,
Aye.
Mr. Joins.
Aye.
Move to pass on the first, second, and third read this evening.
Moved by Councilman Lewis to pass this on the first, second, and third read. Discussion?
Thank you,
Roll.
Mr. Fisher.
Mr. Lewis,
Aye.
Mr. Harvey,
Aye, aye, aye.
Mr. Fisher,
Aye.
Mr. DeZ,
Aye.
Mr. Schmidt,
Aye.
Mr. Joins.
Aye.
Thank you. Moving on to the fiscal officer's report.
I, Lori Canada, Fiscal Officer for the Village of McDonald, Ohio, do hereby declare that the bills are true and correct in the amount of $162,508.09, and the money is in the bank to pay them. And we
Move
had
to
a bid
accept the
opening
V-
today. Oh,
We need to accept that if we could.
yes.
Yeah, move to accept the VFO's report and pay the bills.
Moved by Councilman Lewis to accept the VFO's report and pay all bills. Discussion? Roll.
Mr. Lewis,
Aye.
Mr. Harvey,
Aye.
Mr. Fisher,
Aye.
Mr. DeZ,
Aye.
Mr. Schmidt,
Aye.
Mr. Joins.
Aye.
Now I'll go with, we had a bid opening today for the 2020 street resurfacing project. These are the official bids that were opened. The company's names and bids are as follows. RT Vernal Paving and Excavating Incorporated for $144,471.63. Lindy Paving in the amount of $181,703.65. Barbika's Construction Company Incorporated, $207,758.33. Chagrin Valley Paving Incorporated, $212,457.23. And last, American Contracting Incorporated for $215,263.75. The bids have been turned over to our engineer, GPD, for extensive review, and they will give us their recommendation in a few days.
Thank you.
You're
That
welcome.
report there. Anything else from the fiscal officer?
No, Mayor.
Okay, seeing nothing under miscellaneous.
What an adjournment from Mr. Harvey. I'll zoom in on
Moved
that.
by, yeah. Moved by Councilman Harvey to adjourn. Discussion? Roll.
Mr. Harvey,
Aye.
Mr. Lewis,
Aye.
Mr. Fisher,
Aye.
Mr. DeZ,
Aye.
Mr. Schmidt,
Aye.
Mr. Joins.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Nice work, everyone.
All right.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
See you guys. Stay healthy.
Yes.
Before you turn that off, remember.